Emilie sat at the back of the classroom during that literature lesson, as always, silent, barely taking notes, just lightly flipping through a book she'd read 3 years ago. But her eyes never strayed from two people in the middle of the room, Julien Moreau and Isabelle Laurent. When the bell rang, everyone spilled out of their seats as usual. Emilie lingered, pretending to tie her bag strap. She saw Isabelle bend down to pick up her books. She saw Julien pass by, too perfectly timed to be chance, and nudge her shoulder with a subtlety that could be denied if needed.
Oh, Julien's voice rang out, saccharine to the point of nausea.
Sorry.
Don't date issue out two old books in Belleville.
The three others, Emilie mentally dubbed them the Hollow Allies Council, burst into laughter. No one helped Isabelle. Professor Deneuve, renowned for her intellect but spineless, had turned away before anything hit the floor.
Isabelle crouched, heure unsteady.
She picked up each item as if reassembling her own world, unhurried, unafraid. When she stood, her eyes locked onto Julien's. Emilie almost held her breath.
Not a word escaped d'Isabelle.
But the way she looked at him, calm, raw, like holding a mirror to someone who didn't want to see themselves, made Julien falter. Just for a second. But long enough to show he hadn't anticipated this move. And that irritated him. At noon, the cafeteria was as crowded as ever. Emilie carried her tray, circling a few times, weighing her options.
She spotted Isabelle sitting alone.
No one beside her.
Not a single greeting.
That girl had just done what the whole school avoided. She hadn't bowed to Julien Moreau. And though Isabelle didn't know it, Emilie had watched every second. She approached, tilting her head slightly, keeping her voice as soft as possible. Is this seat taken? Isabelle looked up. Her eyes were briefly guarded, then shifted to surprise. I'm Emilie, she said, setting her tray down.
The only one here with nothing to lose. Isabelle gave a small nod. I'm Isabelle.
I know, Emilie smiled, snapping her cookie in half. You just made Julien lose it in literature class. That's worth remembering. And for the first time in weeks, Emilie thought, maybe this school year won't be entirely dull. The black iron gate of St. Clair Academy creaked open with a low, heavy thud, like a warning. Isabelle Laurent stepped through, carrying a worn but neatly packed backpack, her hair tied back tightly, and eyes that held a resilience beyond her years. The ash-gray uniform clung to her slender, upright frame. Her leather shoes gleamed, polished to a mirror-like shine, the only sign she'd prepared every detail. Beyond the gate lay another world, limestone buildings with Enyong-tiled roofs, perfectly trimmed hedges, and ancient statues bearing the marks of 3 centuries of glory and exclusion. The other students, mostly pale, with blonde or perfectly straightened brown hair, carried the air of belonging. A few glanced sideways. Some smirked. A pair whispered as they passed Isabelle, their voices soft but loud enough for her to hear. Belleville at St. Clair?
Les quotas à parler.
Belleville at St. Clair? Clearly the quota speaking. Isabelle didn't react. She'd rehearsed this moment, calm expression, chin slightly raised, steps even, eyes forward. The silver locket around her neck swayed gently, an heirloom from her grandmother, who fought against racial discrimination in the 60s. Isabelle gripped it like a silent vow. The classroom was steeped in classical style, heavy wooden desks, walls adorned with portraits of great authors, and a chalkboard instead of a digital screen. Professor Deneuve, platinum hair, gold-rimmed glasses, was lecturing on Victor Hugo. Why, students, is Jean Valjean a symbol of unconventional justice? Isabelle raised her hand. Deneuve looked surprised, a new student, a scholarship student, daring to speak first. Professor, Isabelle said clearly, her voice steady, because Valjean represents a justice that transcends formal law, the kind written by those in power to protect themselves. His humanity makes the law seem hypocritical. The room fell silent for a moment. Deneuve narrowed her eyes. A sharp argument. Your name?
Isabelle Laurent.
Note her name, Deneuve told her assistant. I want to hear more from her. At the back, a pair of icy blue eyes narrowed. Julien Delacroix, top student, student council president, son of Senator André Delacroix, watched Isabelle like a chess piece that had moved out of turn. Beside him were his 3 closest friends, Maxime, son of a tycoon, Hugo, son of a judge, and Theo, the headmaster's nephew. Sounds like progressive drivel, Julien whispered. But not here. Break time. As class ended, Isabelle was picking up her books when Julian, too precisely to be accidental, brushed past, nudging her shoulder and scattering her books across the floor. "Oh," he said with venomous sweetness, "sorry. Don't they teach you how to hold books in Belleville?" The three others laughed loudly. No one helped her. Professor Deneuve had turned away, as if blind to it all. Isabelle knelt, unhurried. She gathered each book, each pen, each note, then stood, facing Julian, her gaze direct, wordless. He froze for a second. That silence, not meek, not weak, unsettled him. A flicker of unnamed anger crossed his eyes before he turned away. Lunch. Isabelle sat alone. No one approached. Not a single greeting. Until a soft voice broke through. "Is this seat taken?" It was Emilie Dubois, curly-haired, wide-eyed, always carrying a book. "I'm Emilie," she said with a smile. "The only one here with nothing to lose." Isabelle looked up, briefly surprised, then nodded slightly.
I'm Isabelle.
"I know. You just made Julian lose it in literature class. That's worth remembering." The afternoon at St. Clair was bathed in soft sunlight, like a porcelain glaze over the ancient stone walls, but inside the classroom, the air was thick, like fog before a storm. Isabelle sat through advanced math, quickly realizing she was isolated not only by her peers but also by the teacher. She solved a complex problem correctly in front of the class, but instead of acknowledgement, Professor Durand gave a curt nod and moved on without a word of encouragement. After class, as she stepped out, Isabelle found a message scrawled in black marker on her locker: "Belleville trash doesn't belong here." She stared at it for a long moment, then silently pulled a tissue from her bag and wiped away each stroke. Her hands didn't tremble, but her eyes darkened. Emilie appeared from the other end of the hallway, quietly helping her clean the rest. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Their shared glance held enough understanding. The battles at St. Clair wouldn't be fought with fists, but with persistence, silence, and strategy. That evening, in the small apartment she shared with her mother, Isabelle recounted everything. Mrs. Laurent, her mother, looked at her daughter for a long moment. A nurse in her youth, she'd been forced out of her job after protesting discriminatory policies against immigrant patients. Her voice was soft but firm. "You have a right to be there, Isabelle. You're not a guest. You're proof that place doesn't belong only to them. Don't kneel." Isabelle nodded, a surge of resolve rising within her. She opened her laptop and began documenting every act of bullying: dates, times, locations, people involved. She couldn't strike back the way Julian wanted, but she could gather evidence. This wasn't just about her, it was for those who would come after. The following days were a series of covert moves. Isabelle observed more closely, noting who stood nearby during incidents, eavesdropping on whispers among the privileged cliques. Emilie, the only one privy to her plan, quietly assisted by creating distractions or borrowing library cards so Isabelle could access records when needed. One day, while sitting in the library, Isabelle was approached by a lanky boy with messy hair and glasses. Louis Marchand, son of a philosophy professor who'd refused to fund the school board years ago, was almost as much an outcast as she was. "I see what you're doing," Louis said softly. "And I think you're on the right track. But be careful. Julian has more eyes than you think." Isabelle eyed him warily but nodded. "I need everything on the school surveillance system. Who has access to delete camera data?" Louis gave a faint smile. "I know where the main storage is. And I have a friend in the tech room." Thus began their quiet alliance. 3 pieces of a puzzle: Isabelle, the target; Emilie, who deeply understood injustice; and Louis, with technical knowledge and a grudge against the system. They called themselves the Note Room, a deceptively gentle name that carried their caution and rebellious spirit. One late night, in a small room on the 3rd floor of the old library, they opened a deleted video file Louis had recovered from a backup archive. It clearly showed Julian and Hugo sneaking into Isabelle's room, rummaging through her bag, and laughing as they toyed with her phone. Emilie exhaled softly. "Enough to send to the disciplinary board?" Isabelle shook her head. "Not yet. But it's a start. We need more. We need to show all of St. Clair that favoritism has become a weapon." She saved the file to a portable drive, hiding it carefully in her pencil case. The next morning the word trash appeared again, this time on Isabelle's gym uniform, hung in the locker room. But unlike before, she didn't wipe it off. She wore it as it was, walking through the sports field and into class, head held high. All eyes turned to her. A few snickers broke out. But among them were also stirred glances. The silence began to crack. 2 weeks had passed since Isabelle wore the trash gym uniform across the school courtyard. She said nothing, offered no defense, showed no anger, and that silence sparked whispers throughout St. Clair. The mocking laughter dwindled, replaced by curious, fearful, and even admiring glances. The invisible wall of privilege began to crack in places no one had noticed. Meanwhile, the note room pressed on with their data collection. Lewis accessed the school's internal network, uncovering an unencrypted drive containing disciplinary reports removed from the official system. Among them were complaints from other scholarship students, many of whom had been pressured to transfer or expelled for not aligning with St. Clair's values. One file belonged to Hana Petrovich, a Serbian girl who had won a national literature prize but was suspended for plagiarism in an essay, though the subject teacher later refused to sign off on the accusation. Hana had left France the previous year, her story buried in silence. Isabelle read every line, every paragraph, feeling not just anger but a profound sadness. People like Hana, like her, had been erased from the school's memory like dust wiped from glass. But she was still here. They decided to act. The plan unfolded on Monday morning during St. Clair's annual Honor Festival, an event celebrating outstanding students, predictably limited to those from elite families. The grand hall gleamed with banners and fresh flowers, and headmistress Madame Bouchard, in a slate blue suit, delivered a booming speech. As the list of students honored for contributions to the school community was announced, and Julian and his clique took the stage, something unexpected happened. The large screen behind them, meant to display festival images, went black. Then white text appeared, the student St. Clair pushed to the margins. What followed was a video compiled from Lewis's recovered data, footage of Julian and Hugo rummaging through Isabelle's bag, audio of their mocking conversation, excerpts from old complaints, and grainy camera footage of a teacher being shoved out of an office after filing a report about misconduct. The hall fell silent. Julian stood frozen, his face flushing red, then paling. Madame Bouchard stammered, signaling to the tech staff, but Lewis had remotely locked the controls from the operations room. The video ran for 3 minutes, 3 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Isabelle wasn't on stage. She sat below, among the most ordinary students, those once deemed invisible. Emilie gripped her hand. A few teachers exchanged glances, saying nothing. The system built on silence now faced the light. When the video ended, no one clapped. A freshman stood, bowed to Isabelle, and left the hall. A small gesture, but it echoed. The ceremony was abruptly postponed. Julian and his group were summoned to the headmistress's office. More importantly, the laughter stopped. No one dared pretend they hadn't seen. That afternoon, Isabelle received an email from Madame Bouchard requesting a private discussion about this morning's events. But she was ready. She entered the headmistress's office without fear, placing the hard drive with all the data on the desk. When Madame Bouchard began with threats about damaging the school's reputation, Isabelle cut in. If St. Clair's reputation is built on silencing people like me, maybe it deserves to crumble. The headmistress was stunned. This wasn't a girl needing protection. This was a fighter. Isabelle stood, leaving the office without another word. In the hallway, Lewis was waiting. Emilie was nearby, calmly recounting Hana's story to a group of students. St. Clair had seen the truth. And from now on, they could never pretend not to know. News of the Honor Festival incident spread quickly, beyond St. Clair to parents, alumni, and even education journalists. The school's board initially tried to downplay it, scheduling an emergency parent meeting to address the named students, but Isabelle's group was a step ahead. Lewis had sent a copy of the video to an independent journalist who'd investigated discrimination cover-ups at elite schools. The article, published on a major platform Tuesday morning, was titled, "St. Clair, What Lies Beneath the Aristocratic Veneer?" It detailed the events with clear evidence from the internal files Isabelle and Lewis provided. What made it undeniable was its tone, not a personal attack but a critique of the system. Not just Julian, not just Madame Bouchard, but how an elite school had sustained silence to protect reputation over justice. Public reaction was swift and fierce. The school issued a statement: a group of students misused technology to spread misinformation, disrupting academic activities. But that same day, 11 alumni sent an open letter confirming similar incidents had happened to them, and they'd been forced to stay silent. That evening, the parent meeting took place in the hall. For the first time in years, parents of scholarship students, usually too intimidated to speak, stood up. A father, a former construction worker, spoke with a trembling voice. "I thought if my child worked hard, that would be enough. But you taught my child that their background is a crime." No one interrupted him. Emilie rose next. "We didn't come to destroy. We came to survive. But in being forced to live in silence, we learned the need to break it." Some wealthy parents objected, but this time, they received no applause. Many teachers began questioning their roles, how often they'd looked away, chosen silence for safety. The next morning, Madame Bouchard was temporarily suspended pending an investigation. Julien and his group were barred from extracurricular activities, and St. Clair announced an independent committee to review student management and complaint processes. Isabelle didn't celebrate. She quietly packed her books in the library, where she'd once been mocked for reading too much. Emilie placed a hand on her shoulder. "They're listening, Isabelle." She nodded. "For now. But we have to keep speaking, even if they turn away again." That afternoon, she and her group held a small forum in the old common room, once the private playground of the elite student council. Now, anyone could enter. They discussed scholarship policies, how the school should handle complaints, and the need for a truly representative student council. Not everyone agreed. There were debates. Some walked out. But no one was ridiculed. And that was already a vast difference. That evening, Isabelle posted a short piece on the school bulletin board. "I don't want to replace those with power with others like me. I want a place where no one needs power to be treated fairly. We may not be there yet. But we're closer." She signed it simply, Isabelle Laurent, 11th grader. In the days that followed, small notes appeared beneath it. "I was silent once. No more. I'm Hannah. And I still remember. Thank you for saying what I couldn't." St. Clair didn't change overnight. But the wind had shifted. April arrived with the first tender buds blooming by the library windows of St. Clair, a place once a silent domain now transformed into a hub of open, vibrant discussions. Isabelle sat beside Emilie, her eyes scanning a draft for the upcoming dialogue with the school administration. Since the events of the previous month, a series of quiet reforms had begun. A new student council, elected transparently rather than appointed, was now operational, with representatives from all grades and backgrounds. Isabelle was chosen to lead the Transparency and Campus Equality Subcommittee. Louis became a liaison with the teachers. With his eloquence and sharp reasoning, he persuaded some to rethink their approach to scholarship students. The history teacher, once criticized for bias, voluntarily held a special session on unconscious bias in academic settings, a move that would have been dismissed as fanciful a year ago. But not everything went smoothly. Julien returned after a 2-week suspension. His entourage was gone. The whispers that once came from him now targeted him. He sat alone during lunch, avoiding others' gazes. One late afternoon, Isabelle saw him standing quietly in the library, staring at the shelves where cruel taunts had once unfolded. Their eyes met. He hesitated. "I don't know how to apologize properly," Julien said, his voice stripped of its former arrogance. "But I remember what you said at the ceremony. That power shouldn't be shielded by silence. I was always protected by that silence." Isabelle didn't respond immediately. She gave a slight nod. "Sometimes, it's not about apologies. It's about acting differently." He left after that. But from that day, Julien began working in the library, quietly shelving books, logging loans and returns. No one assigned him the task. He just showed up. In May, the Regional Education Reform Conference was held at St. Clair. A year ago, no one would have believed a school once exposed for discrimination and cover-ups could be chosen as a model for reform. Isabelle, in a simple white shirt and a notebook plastered with sticky notes, stood before officials, education administrators, and students from other schools. Her voice was steady. St. Clair was once a place where students like me were told to be grateful for being allowed to exist. Now, we don't just exist. We shape how this place runs. Below, Emilie recorded the speech. Louis nodded with a smile. Hannah, a freshman once silently bullied for her stutter, raised her hand to speak for the first time at a crowded conference. The story didn't end in triumph. It ended in change, slow, imperfect, but real. That evening, Isabelle's group gathered under the willow tree by the courtyard, once the exclusive haunt of pedigreed students. Now, no one was chased away. Anyone could come. Louis leaned back on his backpack, gazing at the stars. "Do you think we've won?" Isabelle smiled, her eyes calm. "We haven't won. But at least our voices aren't being swallowed anymore." The night breeze stirred the leaves, as if in agreement. That summer, St. Clair didn't just change from within. It became a regional symbol of a school once tarnished by abused power, now learning to heal through truth and courage. But any place daring to upend the old order faces resistance. An anonymous email was sent to the Regional Education Board, accusing the student leaders of the reform movement, especially Isabelle, of ethical violations, media manipulation, and fabricating evidence of discrimination to gain attention. The email was persuasively worded, selectively quoting from speeches and spliced conversations. The Education Board was forced to launch an internal investigation. Isabelle was required to submit all materials used in meetings and speeches. Emilie was ordered to remove videos shared on social media. Louis was temporarily suspended from his student representative role for 2 weeks. For the first time since the movement began, their group felt like they were fighting alone. Teachers who once supported them now stayed silent. The parent council was divided, fueled by anonymous articles on a local news site linked to Julian's old family allies. Julian, once the scandal center, was now an ordinary student. When he heard the news, he sought out Isabelle. "I didn't send that email," he said immediately, his eyes more serious than ever. "I know what it's like to be smeared. I know the taste of cowardly power. And I'm done staying silent." He spoke out publicly, not to apologize for his past, which he'd already done, but to stand with the group, for the first time as an ally, not an adversary. His unexpected support surprised the public, forcing the Education Board to reconsider the complaint's objectivity. But in the heart of the storm, Isabelle had a profound conversation with her father, a reserved accountant who'd once urged her to avoid attention. "My daughter," he said, his eyes misty but proud, "I was afraid you'd get hurt. But now I see that sometimes hurt is the price of not being swallowed. I'm not afraid anymore." The investigation concluded with no concrete evidence of wrongdoing. Yet it exposed a flaw in the system. Even with reforms, a strike from the shadows could still shake everything. Isabelle understood. Reform was never a destination. It was a journey, long, grueling, and often lonely. But on that journey, victims had become builders. Those who once mocked them, if they hadn't learned their lesson, no longer held default power. At summer's end, before Isabelle left for a European Technical Institute on a full scholarship, the group gathered at the old sports field. A banner was hung at the main entrance. "St. Clair belongs to all students. No discrimination, no fear." Louis raised his camera, capturing the final moment. Isabelle didn't look at the lens. Her gaze was on the classrooms where the journey began, where the first cracks had forced light to seep through. She knew she would leave, but the story would go on. Because light, once it breaks through, can never be pushed back.